Coming up on the Hashimoto's Doctor podcast, we're going to dive deep into vitamin D. From ancient tribes to modern science, discover the secrets of vitamin D's dual forms and the fascinating ways they work. We'll discuss why your vitamin D levels might remain low despite supplementation and how this sunshine nutrient links to inflammation, immune system balance, and even our genes. Plus, we'll unveil a paradox that might change everything you thought you knew about vitamin D. So join us for this fascinating journey into the little-known secrets of vitamin D. Welcome to the Hashimoto's Doctor podcast. You're now part of a growing community of people determined to take their health back through education and self-empowerment. But because of the healthcare system today, we don't have access to the types of healthcare that we want. So we have to do things differently. We've got to do things smarter, and we do that by becoming our own advocates. This podcast will give you the perspective and thoughts of one of the world's leading Hashimoto's doctors. So let's get started. Welcome back to the Hashimoto's Doctor podcast. I'm your host, Brad Shook, and today we're not just discussing vitamin D. We're going to touch on aspects of this amazing vitamin that spans across time, geography, and even our DNA. This is one you thought you knew about that you're not going to want to miss. Vitamin D, often dubbed the sunshine vitamin, has a secret identity. It's not even a vitamin. In reality, it's a prohormone, or a precursor to a hormone. Ancient tribes in regions like Scandinavia and northern Canada, where the sunlight's pretty scarce, they had a secret. They knew that despite this lack of sunlight, they could get vitamin D from various sources. And these tribes had incredibly strong bones and really good health with minimal autoimmune diseases. And their secret was that they had a rich diet in fatty fish, in seals, and reindeer. These are all natural sources of vitamin D. And these tribes instinctively knew the importance of this nutrient, and they sourced it from their environment. Imagine living far from the equator, say above the 37th parallel north and the 37th parallel south. In such places, for several months, the sun might not provide enough rays for our body to produce adequate vitamin D. It's crazy, right? You just don't get enough direct sunlight. So what do we do? Well, supplementation is probably, for most people, going to be the ideal way to get your vitamin D. We'll touch on some of the potential sources, but one source that I think is interesting that also has many other health benefits, this probably will not meet all of your needs, are mushrooms. When mushrooms are exposed to ultraviolet light, they will actually produce vitamin D2. It's a different variant from the form that our skin and our body makes, which is vitamin D3, but it still can help with our vitamin D needs. Now, before you really consider vitamin or mushrooms for their vitamin D content as your only source, you really have to understand that not all mushrooms have significant amounts of vitamin D. It depends on how they're raised, where they're raised. Are they exposed to significant ultraviolet light or not? And so there are certain types of mushrooms that have higher levels, like portobello and also maitake, are pretty high in, or I should say are higher in vitamin D2. It just, again, depends on the growing conditions and whatnot. So they're not, mushrooms are not just good for you. They are good for you. They have all of these incredible compounds in them. They have beta glucans. They can actually help with your immune response. But they also have some vitamin D. It's just not quite enough. But I still think that it's very interesting that they make their own vitamin D, and that it is, it is a potential source for us when it's in the winter and the sun is at a different angle and we don't have as much sunlight. And then, of course, if you live above or below the 37th parallels, north and south, then there could be some real problems with your ability to make sufficient vitamin D. So this might be something that you want to consider adding into your diet, but I would not consider it as your only source. You really should consider things like cod liver oil, which is a fantastic way to get vitamin D, which is already mixed with fat. because you got to keep this in mind. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. So if you just take it by itself, or if you don't take it with fat, which most supplements, most vitamin D supplements, it is in some sort of fat, like a medium chain triglyceride, or if you're using a liquid, it is already mixed with the fat that, for one thing, helps with absorption because, again, it's a fat-soluble vitamin. So you might want to consider, if you like mushrooms, they can be a great way to incorporate a little bit of vitamin D into your diet. Again, it's D2, so it's a different form, and D2 has to be converted into the active form in the liver and the kidneys, and the research suggests that it doesn't, bind to our vitamin D3 receptors the same way or as strongly. So it does have some, it's a less favorable form, but it's still vitamin D, and it's pretty cool that we can also get these other benefits from mushrooms and get a little bit of vitamin D at the same time. Did you know that your DNA plays a role in how your body uses vitamin D? You actually have something called a vitamin D receptor gene, or commonly abbreviated VDR gene, and this can influence how your body uses vitamin D. We have genetic variations, which are called genetic polymorphisms, or just gene polymorphisms, which are uniquenesses. They're not mutations. A lot of times they're referred to as mutations, but they occur far too frequently in the human population to be called mutations. They're just variations of genes, and we have these polymorphisms in all of our genes, and the vitamin D receptor is no different. And if you have certain variations in your genes for this VDR receptor, this vitamin D receptor, it might mean that you need more vitamin D than other people to get the stimulatory effect. And really, while we're on this topic, something that I came across that I think is really important to keep in mind is that vitamin D might actually have a very significant impact on your sleep. And you don't typically associate, even I don't, top of mind think if someone's having difficulty with sleeping that, vitamin D is the first thing that comes to my mind. There's so many other things that I typically am considering and thinking of first, but there's some research that is linking vitamin D deficiencies to sleep disorders. So if you're having problems sleeping, it might be worth checking your vitamin D levels. It's one of, if not the most important vitamin to optimize and test. You need a blood test so that you can determine what your levels are and put together a strategy to increase those levels to, where they need to be at an optimal level. It might be the most important thing that you can do for your health. So speaking about vitamin D levels, this next segment is a really important segment, and this is probably something that you're not familiar with, but this is definitely a little bit more technical, but hang with me, I think you'll get it. So you might be familiar with the term 25-hydroxy vitamin D and 1,25-hydroxy vitamin D. But do you know the significance of these when it comes to our immune system and inflammation? So let's unravel this a little bit, okay? First of all, the 25-hydroxy form is the inactive form, and that's typically what we check when we're, when we do blood tests. It's 25-hydroxy vitamin D. It's just what the labs have always done, and that's the one that's commonly evaluated. The 1,25-hydroxy vitamin D is the active form, and that occurs within our body. Our body will convert the inactive form to the active form. So many of us, whether we're in the medical field or as patients, we've come across these vitamin D tests. And the range for these tests usually falls between 30 to 100 if you've looked at your labs before. And I hope you've had vitamin D checked. If you haven't, you definitely should ask for it. With my clinic, we always check vitamin D. If it's, unless we don't do any testing, which there are plenty of cases where I've worked with people without doing testing, especially if we're on a limited budget. We'll do everything that we can, but usually that's a test that we will try and get, that's not overly costly or expensive. And today, most doctors will actually run these tests for you if you have a primary care, and if it's cheaper through your insurance. Though, ironically, a lot of times some of these tests are more through the insurance. So it's a whole different topic, but the range is huge, right? 30 to 100 is the range. And most functional medicine experts believe that you should at least be at 50. And, for me, that's like a good number, but it's really kind of a minimum. Yeah, a lot of the people that I work with that have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune thyroid disease, it's what causes 90% of the low thyroid conditions or hypothyroidism in the United States. It's just epidemic levels. I mean, if you just think about it, every person that's hypothyroid that has a low thyroid, 9 out of 10 of those people have it because of this autoimmune disease. And so vitamin D has a profound impact on immune system modulation and can be really helpful for autoimmunity. And I don't want to digress too much, but this is like a minimum level in my mind, 50. And then, I've had people that do much better at about 70. And then, I've had some that felt fantastic when it's even higher. You just want to make sure that you have adequate vitamin K so that you're not, the calcium is directed into the bones and not into soft tissues. That's one of the benefits of now you'll see most of these supplements have vitamin D with K2 or various forms of K. And that's good. That really helps for several reasons, but one of the primary reasons is that it helps to direct the calcium into the bone versus potentially into soft tissue. But what happens when, despite supplementation, these levels don't come up? I mean, because a lot of people have had that happen. They're like, I take a vitamin D, and for some reason they're not coming up. And this is where our discussion is going to get into some vitamin D metabolism and some of the nuances here a little bit more, which I think is really fascinating. So first, let's address the elephant in the room here. Low vitamin D levels have been linked to a plethora of health issues, from cancers to prostate and colorectal to autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis and even type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune type of diabetes. So vitamin D is, deficiencies associated with all kinds of potential complications. Now, while there are several factors like your age, your sun exposure, and your diet that play a role in your vitamin D levels, there's also another layer to this story. And this is where, as we mentioned earlier, the 1,25 hydroxy vitamin D form that I mentioned, the active form, which is also known as calcitriol, this is the active form, and it plays a really critical role in our immune system response. And in fact, when our body's inflamed, we have higher levels of inflammation or we're fighting an infection, kind of like I am, that's why I sound so nasally, it rapidly will convert the 25 hydroxy vitamin D, which is the inactive form, that's what is evaluated on laboratory testing, into this 125 hydroxy vitamin D. And this is the body's way of dealing with the immune challenge that you're having. So here's the connection. Okay, if you ever find that despite supplementing with vitamin D, that your levels aren't rising, it might be worth checking the 125 hydroxy vitamin D levels. Elevated levels of this form, the 125 hydroxy vitamin D, might indicate an underlying inflammatory response or even an autoimmune reaction. And this conversion is the body's way of saying, hey, I need more firepower to deal with this immune challenge that I'm having. But for as far as supplementation goes, the question is, should we continue giving vitamin D if it's just being converted into this active form or not? And really the answer isn't that straightforward, because some autoimmune diseases might benefit from this conversion into 125 hydroxy, the active form, especially if it's like triggered by a virus. but others might not. And it's a really a delicate balance here to try and determine what is right and wrong. But understanding this conversion and why you might have higher 125 than 25 is really important. So the next time that you're puzzled by why you might have low vitamin D levels, just remember that there's this issue with conversion that might be occurring. And this might just be the key to understanding the bigger picture of, what's actually happening with your health. And for practitioners, consider adding in this 125 form to your toolkit. And it's something that I don't order that routinely. But if we're supplementing with vitamin D and we see that it's not, the 25 hydroxy form is not coming up, then I'm thinking about, okay, do we have absorption issues? What form is the vitamin D? I usually recommend a liquid form that is held under the tongue for 60 to 90 seconds to try to absorb through the mucous membrane into the lymphatics to get it into circulation more efficiently so it can bypass the GI tract. Or I'll recommend a liposomal form that has cofactors added to it for better absorption so that it can be absorbed through the mucous membranes in the mouth and in the esophagus as it's passing down into the stomach, because a lot of people don't absorb well because they don't have good digestion. They have problems with absorption. They have problems with fat absorption. And if you've had like gallbladder issues or the gallbladder removed, you may not be able to digest fats efficiently. And remember, vitamin D is fat soluble, so it absorbs with your fats, and you need to take it with fat. So that's something that you really have to keep in mind. Like, is there, why is the vitamin D not coming up? Is the person taking the right dose? What form are they taking? Is it a capsule that's not breaking down? Do they have low stomach acidity, poor absorptive capacity, poor ability to emulsify and absorb fats and their fat-soluble vitamins? Or is it like a vitamin D receptor polymorphism, this gene uniqueness that might be creating some problems too? I mean, there are a number of different things to keep in mind when you see vitamin D levels not coming up as you would anticipate with supplementation. Though I'll say in most cases, if there's, when I'm working with someone, if there's a high level of inflammation or a potential infection, we can usually pick that up. You can look at some simple testing to see if you have like acute infections, of course, like a complete blood count with differential. That's a real simple, straightforward way to see if the immune system is active and dealing with a potential infection. But there are quite a few factors here, but this 125 hydroxy form is a good thing to add in just to see if it's being converted and if it's significantly higher. And that can be a helpful way for you to get a better and more clear picture about what's happening with the individual so that you can tailor your plan and strategy to try and help them. Before we conclude our deep dive on vitamin D, let's take a moment to explore some lesser known yet fascinating aspects of this vitamin, or as we know, prohormone. And some of these things we've talked about briefly, but I think it's worth bringing them up again because they're that interesting. So first of all, the vitamin D identity crisis. So despite its name, vitamin D is actually what? It's actually a prohormone, right? So it's not a vitamin. It is a prohormone. This means that our bodies produce it in response to sun exposure, unlike other vitamins, which we've got to get from our diet. So this is a small distinction, but it's one that underscores its unique role in our health and actually gives you more clarity on what it actually is. It's not a vitamin. The second thing here is this idea about, latitude. So again, if you're above the 37th parallel north or below the 37th parallel south, your vitamin D production might be compromised for several months out of the year. So it's not just about living in areas where it's cold, it's about the angle of the sun's rays. So even if you're out in the snow, you might not be getting your dose of vitamin D. So this is something, really important to think about. The third thing is this genetic connection. Our genes play a role in how we use vitamin D. Remember that vitamin D receptor gene, or the VDR gene, it can influence this. So if you've been struggling with vitamin D levels, it might be worth, getting your genetics checked. I mean, if you have any of the commercially available testing, you can run it through. I mean, I believe, like, for example, 23andMe, which is, probably the most well-known company that will do genetic testing for you. They have some reports. They have many, many reports. And I believe one of those is the vitamin D receptor report. And it will give you information on whether or not you have a polymorphism that is has the potential to create some problems with your vitamin D receptor and your ability to use it. And this is, I want to mention something about this too. If you do genetic testing and you start looking at all of these genetic polymorphisms, do not make the mistake of thinking that just because you have a gene uniqueness or a polymorphism, that and if the report says that you have, a decreased ability, let's say the report says that you have a decreased ability to utilize vitamin D based on your genes, that's a probability. It doesn't mean that that is for sure happening. And this is really important. I have seen so many people get genetic testing done, and then they think that is the genetic, their gene uniquenesses and all of these that have been identified, that they are occurring. They think it's actually saying this is actually what's happening to me, and this is how my body and these genes are working. And the reality is it's just a probability. It doesn't mean that it's happening. So just because you have a vitamin D receptor polymorphism or unique combination, then that does not necessarily mean that you have the problem. It means you have a probability or a chance of those genes expressing in a way that may be problematic for you, but it doesn't mean that it is. So you have to look at that as a probability and understand, it doesn't mean that just because I have these genes that this is how the genes are expressing. Okay, it doesn't mean that. So it's way more complex. We don't, I think with artificial intelligence and machine learning and all of these, incredible tools that are set to revolutionize healthcare, we're going to be able to see patterns and understand how all of these genes work together much more effectively than we currently do, because it is such a vast amount of information and knowledge that we don't, we see some connections in the literature and the research. We've sequenced the human genome, but we don't know how it all works. We just kind of have this map. We don't really understand it. So because it's all interconnected, and there are genes, I'm sure, out there that have all kinds of influences on one another that we're not aware of. So probability, if you get that testing done, it's a probability. So you would always want to check your 25 hydroxy vitamin D and the 125 hydroxy vitamin D if you wanted to see kind of, based on your diet and your supplementation, what your levels are, and how you're converting it to 125, and to give you some ideas of what's going on. And then all that has to be taken into context as to what is actually happening to you. What are you what kind of problems are you experiencing, if any? If you're not experiencing any problems and you're just trying to find out what your status is, that's fine too. But anyway, there's that genetic connection to be aware of. The fourth thing that I think is kind of interesting is this whole thing with mushrooms that we talked about, and that they can make vitamin D2, and that can be an additional, little supplemental source. It's not going to cover all of your needs, but when these mushrooms are exposed to ultraviolet light, they can produce vitamin D2. So, mushrooms have a lot of potential health benefits. So you might want to incorporate them into your diet if you haven't, because they might just give you a little bit more vitamin D, but then you're going to get all of these other potentially beneficial compounds from them as well. The last thing that I want to talk about is, and remind you is, and this because this is one of the primary things that I optimize to help people achieve, because it is the cornerstone of your health, is sleep, and this sleep and vitamin D connection, right? We talked about this earlier. If if you have problems with sleep, you need to get your vitamin D checked, for one thing, but you also need there are several things that you can do for sleep, and making sure that you have sufficient vitamin D is an important thing to do, because it may have an impact on your ability to sleep. But for my personal opinion on this is that if you can do it, you need to be doing biometrics tracking every single night, either a smartwatch and or a smart ring that you can wear. And then, probably the most, cost-effective way is to actually put an app like Sleep Cycle, by the way, which I have no affiliation with any of these companies, like Sleep Cycle, on your phone, and put your phone in airplane mode and turn it on every single night. That's what I do. I've been doing that for years and years and years, literally years and years. And it tracks my sleep and the sounds that are made. And if you're snoring, or if you're tossing and turning, or if you're coughing, or any of that stuff is going on, you'll never know unless it's terrible. And if you have someone else, significant other, you're disturbing their sleep. You'll never know. And it's one of the easiest ways to know if you have problems with your sleep. And I can tell you that if you have any snoring, you have a problem. If you snore at all, that's not like, I feel okay and it's okay. It's not okay. If you snore at all, you need to have a sleep study. If you wake up exhausted all the time, you need to get a workup done. First of all, looking at, your biomarkers and your risk factors, and you need to get a sleep study done. But one of the easiest things you can do is put the simple app on your phone and start tracking your sleep. You turn it on when you go to sleep. You turn it off when you wake up. It gives you a score. And it is a great way to get into the game of tracking your biometrics. And it's probably, if I had to choose one thing to track my sleep, it wouldn't be my smartwatch or the ring that I wear. It would be this app, because I think that listening to you while you sleep is one of the most valuable things. Now, granted, the smartwatch and the ring will track my oxygen saturation, and your oxygen saturation is critical, because if you do have sleep apnea and you're not breathing well, then you'll see, if you have a device that can measure sensitively enough, you're going to see your oxygen saturation drop. And if you're having when that happens, it's called a desaturation event. If that's occurring, that's a major, major problem. You cannot have that. I'm telling you, I have worked with people that have kind of fought me on this idea that they might have a problem with their sleep. Fought me on it. And whenever I convinced them to start tracking their sleep, and we discovered that they probably had some issues. And then once we got them a sleep study, and you can do like these at-home sleep studies where you actually, if you have insurance, you can contact, if you're like, hey, I don't want to go to a center or whatever, you can actually ask your doctor and they can set it up. Or you can, there are services that you can contact online, chat with a doctor for a few minutes via telemedicine. They'll send you a test kit, and you can actually wear like a pulse oximeter on your finger, and it tracks, a lot of these, your sleep, and gives a detailed report, and it can tell you whether or not you have sleep apnea. Now, if you are, if you need a CPAP or something, though, if you do have sleep apnea, then and you need a CPAP, which assists you with breathing at night, if you with apnea, then that's where you want to go and really have a really good study done at a center, or at least they'll fit you and calibrate it and everything and get you set up. But I have seen optimizing sleep absolutely transform someone's life, their energy levels, their cognitive function. They had no idea. And I've had plenty of people plenty of people that I've worked with that I have to push them on it a bit because they don't want to think that they have that problem, and they don't think that it's that big of a deal. But I can tell you for sure, if you want to be at risk for just about every major disease process that kills us, then if you want to be at risk for those things, higher risk, then just continue to have your sleep apnea, continue to feel terrible. And it's just you sometimes you have to get past yourself, and you need someone to say, look, quit telling yourself this story. It's going to be perfectly fine. You're going to get, if you get a CPAP, it's going to be life-changing. It's going to make your life better. It can improve metabolism. It can save your brain because desaturation events and hypoxia, low oxygen, is terrible for your brain cells. It can be a risk factor for neurodegenerative diseases and loss of brain function. It is one of the best ways to optimize your health and potentially reverse the factors that are causing sleep apnea. So I'm going to get off of my soapbox here, but this is a huge, huge problem. Optimize your sleep, figure it out. And if you, it's something that if you need some guidance, I'll be happy to help you with that. That's what I do. I help people look at everything going on with their life, look at this as comprehensively as possible. If we can get lab work and blood work, we'll do all kinds of blood work, and we can put this picture together, and we can help you to put together a strategy to optimize your health. And the process is the same whether you're in incredible shape and you want to be as sharp and optimal as possible. The process is the same for that person as it is for someone who's in terrible shape with autoimmunity, highly inflamed. It's the same kind of look at the same core factors, look at what they're doing, their diet, their lifestyle, look at their vitamin and mineral needs, look at their blood work, try to figure out the pieces, and then you put together a strategy to bring that person more towards a state of optimization. It's the same process. It's the same strings that you pull. People are just in different places. So keep it in mind, okay? So these 5 things that I've gone on about here really remind us that vitamin D's role in our health is extremely multifaceted, and it goes and affects so many aspects of our physiology. So keep these things in mind as you're working on improving your health and thinking about, this one key component to your health, optimizing your vitamin D. If you found this episode helpful, please share and leave a review. It really helps the podcast. And as always, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can also follow us on YouTube and Facebook at the Office of Dr. Brad Shook. You can join our Facebook group, the Greater Hickory Thyroid Support Group with over 11,000 members, and you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Brad Shook. And remember, together, we can make a difference. As we wrap up the podcast today, let's remember that our health is complex and it's an interplay of a lot of different factors. And it's not just about what we eat, but it's also about how our body uses it. And everyone's journey and health is different, and understanding these factors can make all the difference. So as we continue to learn and grow in our understanding, remember the words of Leonardo da Vinci. Learning never exhausts the mind. So keep seeking, keep learning, and keep striving for the best version of yourself. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed hanging out behind the scenes with Dr. Shook. You can also talk with and learn from Dr. Shook through Facebook Live on our Facebook page at the Office of Dr. Brad Shook. Don't forget, you can also get access to our videos, guidebooks, and thyroid programs at www.drbradshook.com. Oh yeah, and don't forget one more thing. We can change the world one person, one family, and one community at a time. Until next time, remember, today is your day, and no one will tell you who you are and what you can be.